on this edition of the Self-Publishing Show.
I'm a really big fan of Brian McDonald's theory of like, well, no, you should know your theme before you write your book. And then if you're stuck, you can always come back to that.
Publishing is changing. No more gatekeepers, no more barriers, no one standing between you and your readers. Do you want to make a living from your writing? Join indie bestseller Mark Dawson and first-time author James Blatch as they shine a light on the secrets of self-publishing success. This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
Hello and welcome. It is the Self-Publishing Show with me, James Blatch.
And me, Mark Dawson.
The bearded men from England. The old men and the beards. Like Ernest Hemingway. Old. I'm old. You've just got a beard.
Yeah.
I think if I shave and you keep the beard, we look about the same age.
Yeah, possibly.
I
did look about 20 years older before I had my post-lockdown haircut.
Yes.
So, yeah, I was starting to look a bit like the Unabomber.
There's been some bad haircuts around. Tony Blair had a bad one, although he
did. Richard Branson,
yes. Or Peter Stringfellow, he looked like. A nightclub owner in the UK. Anyway, enough rambling. Let's talk books. We've got a couple of things to talk about before our interview with Zach Bohannon, who's a lovely, lovely guy. Really enjoyed our chat today. We talked a bit about collaboration and also story structure. In fact, I am reading Zach's book, 3-Story Method, which he wrote with Jay Thorn at the moment. So I'm plotting my second book. I sort of made a sort of pantsy start on it. I wrote sort of 40,000 words of it just because that's what I do, I think, when I've come up with an idea. Then I stopped and then I plotted it and wrote. And when I say I plotted it, I wrote it out on 2 sides of Word document A4. I've struggled a little bit with Plotter and stuff, not because there's anything wrong with Plotter. Lots of people absolutely love it, but just the way my mind works, I think I just prefer to write out a long synopsis of how the book works. And what I've decided to do for this is to go to Andrew Lowe, who I work with towards the end of the final flight, and said to him, look, can you read the outline? I think the story works really well. I'm really happy with the story, but I'm not convinced I've got the internal motivation of the characters sorted yet. You could help me with that. And what he's done, he's going to do that for free. He has done it for free on the basis that he's going to get the first draft when I've drafted it after the summer, and he's going to do an editorial assessment to say, have I met that, what we talked about, and then he'll do the copy edit. I will then get a separate proof editor after that. So I think that's a good way of working for me. It's a little bit more hands-off from what I did with novel 1, where I really did need hand-holding from the beginning, and hopefully this will be a progress for me. So we had the call this week and it was brilliant. Andrew did a really good job. I'd had an idea about my character's motivation, about something he'd lost early on in his life, and Andrew came up with a really good way. I wrote that sort of opening scene, and then we jump forward 20 years, and the whole story is 20 years later, but that opening scene sort of sets up this moment in his childhood. And he just talked about breaking up that scene and putting it at the beginning of the 3 acts in the book to gradually unfold what happened to him as a child and link it with something physical that he's doing. I'm not going to give too much away because I'm really excited about the story. But it was a really worthwhile conversation, and I don't think everything that's going to be in the book now was there in my outline, but what Andrew did was just gave me a slightly outside my standing in the middle of the forest way of looking at the story and thinking this is how it will work. And it's almost a film script the way that he's structured it now for me. So that was a really worthwhile sort of half an hour, 40-minute chat with Andrew. And now I'm drafting. And I've said the summer just because I'm so busy every day. I don't know how many words, 800 words a day I might get done. I don't know. We will see.
Well, that's not too bad.
Yeah, that would be okay if I can do that. And, I guess it's going to be 120,000 words again. I am planning a little writer's retreat in Florida when we go there for the couple of days before Nink with a couple of friends, with Cecilia and Lucy. And we're going to try and blitz a day there and also talk to each other about books, which I'm very excited about. I've never done anything like that before. So that's Redneck, which it won't be called Redneck, but that's a kind of working title. And I've been researching 1947 wristwatches yesterday that pilots might wear for a very significant reason. And I've really enjoyed that and came very close to buying one, an antique. There's a series of watches called the Dirty Dozen, and the British military during the war decided that most wristwatches were a bit cheap and falling apart for soldiers, so they issued this spec. And 12 manufacturers, I think 11 in Switzerland and one other, came forward, people like Omega were there, and they all met this criteria. And so those 12, the Dirty Dozen they were called, made these watches. British Army bought them in bulk and issued them to soldiers. And they're now for sale, obviously, as they've all got the same symbols on the back on eBay and so on. But that watch is going to feature because obviously an American serviceman almost certainly would have just come back from Europe in 1947 where he would have picked up this watch. So that's a fun little bit. You must have these moments when you start going down rabbit holes for little bits of research for novels, and they can be great fun.
Oh God, yeah. No, I was setting there's a key scene in the new Milton book on the Flannan Islands in the Hebrides.
Never heard of them.
No. There's a lighthouse in the middle of the Atlantic, so it's about 100 miles off the coast of Harris, which is a bit less than that. It's about 25 miles off the coast of Harris, and this is kind of not really connected to the actual story I'm writing, but it is interesting that it's deserted. There's a lighthouse on it, which is automated now, but in the early 1900s, all 3 lighthouse keepers vanished, and no one knows what happened. So to this day, they don't know what happened.
Wow.
So their meals were left on the table, and so when the relief lighthouse keepers came to take over, there was no one there. And the theory is that
Aliens.
People have speculated on aliens, but the theory is that 1 or 2 of them were washed out by. There was 3 of them were washed out by a big wave during a storm, and then the other one went to find out what had happened to the other 2, and he was washed out as well.
Wow!
But no one will ever know because there was no witnesses. So that's. Yeah, that kind of colour is quite useful because there is actually a scene on this island which is mysterious that Milton has to investigate. So you can kind of layer in that kind of an old fisherman can tell a story as he's sailing out with Milton to the island. So that this is the island where 3 lighthouse keepers vanished. So I didn't know that until I often find those kinds of things kind of like, oh, that's perfect.
Yeah,
that's going in some way. I'm going to have to include that. So. Yeah, it's all.
Well, there's another
fun.
novel, though, isn't there? It's a novel about somebody who goes to investigate to finally solve this riddle, and what he discovers in the end is something about himself.
Yeah, it's kind of how the Hammer film that is.
Yes.
Hammer House horror film. I think that there has actually been a couple of films based on what happened. It's very cinematic.
Yeah.
So
Wicker Man type thing.
That's fun.
They were burnt in a Wicker Man. It's an uninhabited island, otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the Hebrides, like St Kilda, is another one.
Right.
So there were people living on places like St Kilda, which is 100 miles off the coast.
Right.
But not now. It's mainly birds. Yeah, a lot of bird watchers. You get puffins and guillemots and fulmars and all those kinds of birds, and whales as well, and dolphins. And
Gosh,
so
it must be an amazing place to be.
Yeah, what I've seen about it looks amazing, and I think I may have mentioned on the podcast, but certainly to my readers, I was contacted by. I'd posted in on my monthly newsletter that I was writing in the Hebrides, set in the Hebrides, and this guy emailed, said, "I'm a big fan. I've read all your books. I actually own Tarrantay, which is the island where
he owns Tarrantay.
Did
I remember
Castaway.
that.
He bought it for $2 million about 10 years ago. Ben Fogel was also trying to buy it.
Wow.
And he's made his money in pharmaceuticals, and he's also got kind of a luxury rentals on Harris overlooking Tarrantay. And so, I said to Lucy, this is a tax deductible trip up to the Hebrides for a bit of research.
Yeah.
So, if we didn't have kids, we'd probably be up there already, but, you never know.
Sounds lovely. Well, Tarrantay, so Castaway was a UK reality program where they stuck a desperate group of individuals on the island. They had to survive for a year.
There's a US version.
Oh, okay.
Ours was based on that.
Followed that, okay. But it looked beautiful, and I think people, because of the Gulf Stream, there's some geography here, but because of the Gulf Stream, you get an almost Caribbean-esque sea up there with sand and blue sky.
Yeah,
and
it's
sea.
crystal clear water, white sand, but it's not Caribbean in temperature.
No, it's icy cold. But I think probably in the summer, in June for 3 days.
Yeah, they have. It's quite nice in the summer, but most of the time it's quite cold because it's quite north.
That's the fun bit of writing. I mean, lots of parts of writing are fun. Some of it is laborious, but I think sort of this bit where you're researching books and feeling excited about a new story for me is a great thing. And so that's what's happened. In terms of my book, I'm coming up to my 900th sale, I think yesterday.
That's good.
Yeah, so I'm really pleased with that. Got a hardback version is now out. No one's bought that. It's only been out for 2 days. I've bought it once. I'll see what it hasn't arrived yet. See what that looks like. I think I mentioned that last week. I put that up, so that's now live. And so that's going okay. And my plan is just to keep some visibility for book one. But reviews are coming in, past 50 reviews now, which I'm really pleased. I don't need to do your webinar on how to get your first 10 reviews.
No.
Now I've got 50.
I've got another one, how to get your first 500.
Yeah, there you go. Very much helped by lots of friends in SPF and then a few other people. I've sort of like a very one of these reviewers who has an Amazon kind of line next to him because his quality of reviews. And he mainly reviews wine stuff. But he also does military thrillers. So the book he reviewed before mine of the same genre was John le Carré. And mine, he did describe me as an emerging talent. And I'm not my words, Carol, the words of Amazon.com review. An emerging fiction talent, he said. I'm going to use that in an advert at some point. Right. Okay, let us press on. We have our interview today. So we have our interviewees with Zach Bohannon. So Zach and Jay Thorn, some of you will be aware of them. They're quite high profile in the industry. Jay Thorn has his own podcast with JD Barker. And they also did this, we mentioned it before, this remarkable trip on a train that Joe Penn took part in. I think Lindsay Barocca as well. I think they got on this train in Chicago and they went down to New Orleans and they wrote a novel based on the train and the journey, sort of collective experience. And Zach and Jay, I think, are very into these trips. Obviously, they've had a difficult 12 months, as we all have in terms of doing anything outside the house. So they've been curtailed. But we want to talk to him. I did want to talk to him about those trips, but also about his own writing, his experience of collaboration, and also about stories. And the bit that I'm going through now with my next book, the plotting bit of trying to make sure the story's working before I start, that sort of role, that balancing act between what you would call it, discovery writing and plotting and having an idea. And I found Zach really, really useful to talk to. I think you will too. So here's Zach, and then Mark and I will be back for a chat.
This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
Welcome to the Self-Publishing Show. Delighted to have you on here. We've just been chin-wagging about Nashville, where you live, a town that I had some fun couple of nights in, and we must get back to at some point. But it doesn't really matter where we are these days, does it? We all, in this electronic world, you can be anywhere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I appreciate you having me on. I appreciate the invite.
Hey, no, it's our pleasure. I want to talk about a bit about you and your writing, because I know it goes back a little way. I've looked at your back catalogue, but I also want to talk about the train, which we have mentioned before on the podcast when Jay was on here. But I think it was before the first one, or maybe the second one. But it was a fascinating project to me, so I want to hear a bit more about that. But why don't we start, Zach, with a bit about you? Tell us about your writing career.
Yeah. So I've been publishing since 2014, I guess, and I've been full-time since 2017. I've been a creative for a long time. Like, my background is, I spent a majority of my 20s playing drums in a heavy metal band and did some touring and stuff like that. And I always had the itch to write, and it was, common story. I always had a story in me. I just never got around to doing it. And then, I picked the best time to try to write a novel, which was right after I had a kid. Right. Yeah. So when I started writing my first book, my daughter was like 5 months old or something like that. But yeah, I put my first book out, and it did really, really well, and kind of catapulted me to be able to make this a full-time career. So, and I primarily write post-apocalyptic sci-fi / horror is kind of my niche and my brand, I guess.
Yeah, so. Very distinctive, very striking covers. Your covers look great. In fact, we can see them if people are watching on YouTube. That's a really good idea. I must get my cover put into a nice big poster on the wall somewhere. I like it. Yeah. How many books have you written now or published?
Oh gosh. 30ish, something like that. It's probably more if you include anthologies and stuff that Jay and I have put together. And there's a few nonfiction books in there as well that are for writers, but it's somewhere right around 30.
Yeah.
I need to go back and count, I guess.
Good.
So,
well, you've passed the 20 books to 50K aim and carried on.
Absolutely. I'm definitely past that part. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
the anthology, the stuff you do with Jay, is that collaborative writing for single books? Was that stuff, you say anthology, that you put together your own writing?
Well, we do the anthologies we do, and I know we're going to get more into this interview, is for the events that we do. Every one of those has an anthology attached. So that when I was saying anthology, that's what I was talking about. Like now, Jay and I have co-written 3 trilogies together,
right?
As well as one nonfiction. Well, we've done a few nonfiction books for writer, but one flagship one, 3-story method. So we've done that as well. But those anthologies are all tied to these events we do.
Okay.
So.
Well, let's just talk a little bit about your writing before we move on to the event.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So with Jay, tell me how that collaborative writing process works.
So we the great thing about when Jay and I work together is I hate editing and he doesn't really like first drafting.
Oh, okay.
So we're really fit really well right there. But generally we'll work on idea, we'll come to the table and work on the ideas together and kind of pound out the outline and stuff together. Usually one of us will take the lead, but then, the other person will come back through and look at it and stuff. And then I do all the first drafting. And then he generally comes right behind me every couple of days, and he'll usually do it in batches. So he'll edit like 3 to 5 chapters at a time. And the idea is, because when we first started, I would write the whole book and then send it to him, and then he would edit it. And then we figured another way we could save time was if he stayed with me the whole time in the book and basically the same spot. And then if he sees problems, he can fix them and then be like, hey, I changed this. So now as you're going forward, this character needs to do this or whatever it is. And it really saved us. It really saved us a lot of time and was just a more efficient way to work together. So, and basically once I'm done with the first draft, I'm pretty much done. I honestly, and some people think this is crazy, but I have books that we finished that I've never read the final product.
Right.
And I know that gives a lot of writers anxiety, but it also shows like, that's my trust for him. Like I know that he's going to take it and he's going to make it really, really good, and that I can just kind of like move on to the next thing. So
that is, I guess everyone enjoys different parts of the process. I quite enjoy the editing bit, particularly towards the end of it when you're getting in the final shape of the book. But I can see that's not your bag.
Yeah. And I'm primarily, so he and I aren't really collaborating anymore on fiction right now. I mean, I say anymore, like at the time we're not. So I'm focusing on my own series right now. And it's funny. I was telling him the other day, there's times where I just want to call him and be like, and I could do this and be like, hey dude, like I miss that collaborative process sometimes, whether I'm stuck on something or I'm tired of editing. Like I'm not going to call him for that, but if I'm stuck somewhere, I could definitely hit him up and try to figure some stuff out. But yeah.
And on the practical side of it, Zach, what's your writing process?
Like as far as like, what do you mean? Like day-to-day process?
Yeah. What time do you get up in the morning? How do you write and all that stuff?
Yeah. So I typically get up around 6:00 and I help get my daughter ready for school and stuff. And then, once everyone's out of the house, usually that's around 7:15 or so. That's when I'll sit down and usually read for about half an hour. And just to kind of, that helps me really get primed to write and usually I try to read fiction in the morning. And then I usually, I typically probably work as far as like deep creative work, whether I'm editing or writing or whatever I'm part of the project I'm in. I usually do about 3 hours a day. So I don't aim for word counts or anything. I'm a time blocker. And my whole idea is just like whatever I get done in that time is what I get done. And I don't worry about how much. I used to be a word count person, but it just gives me, it's not good for me mentally. So my whole idea is just as long as I know I'm making progress and I'm working, then that's really what I worry about. And some days, I have days where I have to pick up my daughter and I have her in the afternoon, and then I really don't work, but I have a couple of days a week that are longer, where my wife is home, and so I those are my long days. And those are the days where in the afternoon, I'll like sit down and do any of the admin type stuff I need to do. I'll do my marketing, all that kind of stuff, which doesn't take me long because I'm not on social media.
Right.
So my marketing stuff doesn't take me super long, but
you're not on social media. That's where you're getting all this time from.
I don't use, so I've been completely off social media for 2.5 years.
Wow.
Yeah, and my book sales went up.
You're talking like a former alcoholic here. It was 2.5 years ago. That was my last post on Facebook. I have been clear of social media.
I think that's not, for a lot of people, I don't think that's a bad analogy. I think it definitely is something that a lot of people are addicted to. And it's also something that, like, the thing I always challenge is people say, oh, well, you have to be on there. Like, you're a writer, you have to be on social media. And I'm like, well, you really don't, and I've kind of, again, my book sales have gone up since I've gone off. I'm happier. I feel more engaged with my audience because I do it all through my mailing list, which, by the way, I did not grow with social media. So that had nothing to do with that. So,
yeah.
But anyways, yeah. So
it
does save me a lot of time, though.
Yeah, I bet it does. And it can be, I think some of the platforms more than others can be a mental drain on you as well. There's no question about that. Although I think it is possible to have social media accounts which you use purely for marketing and don't have a time suck. Facebook in particular, you have a Facebook page. It's not a place particularly where you're going to get interaction beyond your author world, and you use it in the ads manager. And if that's your extent of it, you can be on Facebook without losing hours in the day. And frankly, as far as I'm concerned, Twitter's a waste of time. Apart from the fact I quite enjoy some of the sports and stuff I get from it for author point of view. As far as in my experience, forget it anyway. So, right, okay, good. Well, that's a bit about your background, your writing process. You're right. So I'm always interested in how people write, and I know everyone who listens to the podcast likes these questions as well. So, do you write in Scrivener? Do you write in Word? When you work for yourself, do you plot?
So I'm a meticulous plotter. That is actually the book that Jay and I wrote together, 3-Story Method, is about our process to get you from your idea to your draft.
Right.
So I'm a meticulous plotter. I hate wasting words. The idea of, and I'm not saying every pantser is like this. I'm not saying that at all. But like, I know if I pantsed, I would end up probably having to trash a ton of the manuscript and the editing. And that just gives me so much anxiety to think about. Like, I would rather kind of know going in. And obviously you deviate and stuff. Like, I think that's another misconception. People think just because you're a meticulous planner that you have to stay at that outline. Well, no, that's not the case. But I'm definitely a meticulous planner and have a pretty thought out process for that. And then I write in Scrivener. When in collaborating, like when Jay and I would collaborate, that kind of would fluctuate. Like, sometimes I would write in, like, everything. My stuff would always end up in Google Docs because that's where he would come back in and edit it. And so there were times where I would like keep everything in Scrivener and then just copy and paste my chapters into Google Docs as I went. And there were other times where I would just write in Google Docs, which was always fun because sometimes he would just come in and mess with me and start like editing while I was working on a chapter just to mess with me. But I'm definitely a Scrivener person, and I've gotten to the point where I really do everything in Scrivener. So I do all my plotting, all my research, everything. I try to keep everything in that Scrivener file.
That's great.
And the series I'm working on now, I have the whole series in there. The only thing is, for some notes, I like to handwrite some notes when I'm figuring stuff out. So I'll do the iPad Apple Pencil thing. And I'll do that in Apple Notes. But pretty much everything else is in Scrivener until I have to get it out to a Word file to get to my editor. and because she works in Word, so which is also fine because at the end of the process I use Vellum where I'll need a Word document anyway.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, my whole drafting, pre-production process and all that stuff is all in Scrivener.
Yeah, that's really good. I think that's a good tip to use Scrivener for everything. I mean, I've currently got a Word document open. I've got Scrivener for my work in progress and a Word document open because I'm thinking about titles and stuff. And I just before this interview, I saved it and I thought, where am I going to put this? It's actually a really good thing to have everything in that. There's loads of space in Scrivener, loads of little folders and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I do. I'll put like all that type of stuff, like potential title ideas. Like I have a whole folder just for like, I don't even remember what I call it, like maybe general notes or something. And all that kind of stuff I try to keep in Scrivener just so it's all there. And I'm like pretty crazy about being organized about that stuff. So, I'm pretty content just having everything because I've like messed with other like plotting software and like doing this over here. And then I was like, well, it'd just be easier just to keep everything in Scrivener, So that's kind of what I do.
Yeah.
So.
Keep it simple. Okay. Well, let's talk about the 3-story method. So this is a book, as you say, you've worked together with Jay Thorn on, and Jay's been on this podcast in the past. I'm sure he'll be on again at some point. And I'm interested in this because I am at that stage now. Book 2 for me. The whole first book was a huge, long journey of discovery of introduction to this world. But I feel much more equipped to be organized about book 2. I have my idea in my mind at the moment. So I guess this book is kind of aimed at somebody at my stage now about going from idea, as you say, going from idea to writing. It was a dark and stormy night or whatever first words I come up with.
Yeah. So the way 3-story method came out of, we do these events where, which we'll I know we're going to get into those a little bit, but part of those events is teaching. And Jay, before he became a full-time creative, I mean, he spent 25 years in the classroom. So he is a teacher. And one of the things we would always talk about is we would talk about our collaboration process and stuff. And I remember we'd be in these rooms of like, these 15, 20 authors or whatever. And like, we'd put our outline up and we'd be talking about that stuff and people were fascinated. That's where like most of the questions would come in. And so we were sitting in a hotel room it was probably in New Orleans, I think. And I looked at him and I was like, dude, like at what point do we just tell everyone our process and like actually write it down? And that is what became 3-story method. And it's basically just our, and there's nothing really proprietary in it. I mean, I think that, that's the thing with storytelling is so old and, it's really a mix of all the different, things we've learned from reading other books on writing. And it's all kind of put together with, we have some of our own terminology and stuff. And, we definitely iterated some things, but it's not like a super proprietary thing, but it takes you through, basically like a pyramid of all the different things, whether it's world building your characters, kind of all things you need to do before you can start writing your book. And everything's kind of based in 3s, which is where 3-story method comes from. But yeah, and we just decided to kind of finally put that down, and that's our flagship nonfiction title. And it's it's gotten a lot of really good reaction and something that we're super proud of.
Yeah. Okay, so without giving away all the gory detail, and I'm sure people will still be interested in purchasing the book, can you sort of whet our appetite and on more precisely what the method is?
Yeah, so I would say that the crux of the method is that every aspect of your story needs to have 3 elements. So you need to have a conflict, a choice, and a consequence. And like, this is like the most important part of the book. I mean, we go into a lot more detail about a lot of different stuff. But you need those elements are what keep your story going. So if you have a scene where there's no conflict or your main character is not having to make some sort of choice, like the choice is the big part. Like, I think a lot of people miss that. And I think the other thing is too, a lot of people intuitively do this. Like, it's how we write. Like, you have a conflict in your scene, then you have the character make a choice. But our argument though, is if you actually sit down and think about it, before you write it, then it's just going to be that much better and keep your reader that much more engaged. So, but those elements should be in every aspect of your story. So you need to have a conflict, choice, and consequence on a scene level, or a chapter level, on an act level, on a story level, on a series level. Like it compounds. So like when Jay and I sit down and plan an entire series, we can tell you for like a 9-book series what the main conflict, main choice, and main consequence are going to be, and what we're leading up to. And again, that choice is the most important part, because that's really what drives your story. And that's really what the crux of 3-story method is about, and talking about why those are important, and how to really think about those and put them in each element of your book. So again, that's just one part, because we go into world building, we go into character, we go into a bunch of different things. So
yeah, and that's that conflict, when we talk about external, internal conflict, I mean, that's the external goals and the internal conflict. Do you go along with making those apparent to you as a writer? So in a scene, one way of thinking about it, I think, is what they're trying to do and why they're trying to do it, are the two sides of that.
Yeah, that's definitely something we think about. And on a scene level, you're not always going to have some crazy big conflict in every chapter. Like that would kill your pacing, obviously, So, the conflicts can be really subtle. Sometimes the consequence of your previous scene is the conflict of your next scene. So sometimes those intertwine. But yeah, it can definitely be internal, external. There's obviously different types of choices, and stuff like that as well. So yeah, that's definitely stuff that we address and talk about in the book.
And when you're trying to devise this, because it's one thing to think of a story of something happening, the hunt for Red October, a submarine goes underwater, is trying to defect. It's another thing to have the characters having their own things going on within that. And I think that's where I perhaps struggle. I don't have the experience of you guys at the moment of thinking this through, of trying to work out, well, do I start with my character with a flaw, for instance, with a volatile personality or something that's going to get in his way? And it almost feels a little bit false. You've created something that's going to create conflict and going to create obstacles for him doing what needs to happen in the story. But then as I say this out loud, I think, well, of course it's false. It's, you're making a story up, aren't you?
Exactly.
But you can see I'm struggling a little bit to articulate this, but I think I've got a good story here, but I'm not sure at the moment it's going to be a series of events happening to somebody rather than them driving it. I think that's where I need to get.
Exactly. And that's and another thing we talk about in 3-story method. And again, this isn't proprietary, but every book that we write, we start with a Pixar pitch and a log line. So those things, if you have your Pixar pitch, that's your story,
just explain a Pixar pitch. There's obviously a film reference. So
the Pixar pitch is what Pixar uses to pitch their stories, but it's really basic. It's just it's once upon a time, you fill in the blanks. Like, once upon a time there was the example we use in the book is Star Wars. We use Star Wars in the book, but it's once upon a time. And then every day, so you tell what the character does on a day-to-day basis. One day, this is the opening conflict of the story. Like one day this happens. And then you have, because of that, this happens. Because of that, this happens, until finally. So It's once upon a time, every day, one day, because of that, until finally. And that's your story. Like that is your entire story in there. And then you can take that down even further with the log line, which is like from save the cat. Again, not a proprietary thing, but it's what I tell people. It's like people get really caught up when someone tells you they have a story idea and like, oh, I got this great idea from a story, whether you're at like a cocktail party or like all these other types of places I try to avoid, and they find out you're a writer and they tell you a story. And then like 15 minutes later, they're still talking and you still don't know what their story is about. The Pixar pitch in the log line forces you to be like, this is what my story is about. And you still have the I mean, you still have to go through the paces and you still have to get through the middle slog and all that. And what you and I, what you were just referring to about, like, I don't want it just to be a series of events, but the way we've really laid out our process and how you're always trying to, in each act, you're always trying to work towards, from a conflict to this big choice your protagonists have to make, to that consequence, that really helps drive your story and to keep you from, you always come back to that. And we're also really big on saying always come back to your theme. So I know a lot of writers, because I used to be like this, will say, oh, like, I don't think about my theme before my book because how am I supposed to know my theme until I've written the book? Like, the story kind of tells me the theme. But I'm a really big fan of Brian McDonald's theory of, like, well, no, you should know your theme before you write your book. And then if you're stuck, you can always come back to that. I have for my series I'm working on now, I have a sticky note right in front of me on my computer here that has my theme on it.
Right.
So like anytime I'm stuck, I can look at the sticky note and be like, okay, that's what my story is about that theme. And so yeah, I think that those couple of things are really important and can help you from just having like a series of events.
Yeah, that's great. I completely agree with that. And it's Jenny Nash describes that as answering the question, why do you want to tell this story? Why do you need to tell this story? What's it about? And the theme is like the DNA that sort of runs through every scene. And
absolutely.
I think Cecilia Mecca put me onto a book recently. I've forgotten the author, so I'm going to quote them without knowing who wrote this. But they said, on page 1 of your book, you should state what it's about somehow, not clunkily, but on page 1, it should be clear. Oh, this person's an orphan and is searching for acceptance. And you're clever about it, but then that sort of sets the scene. And like I say, it's in every scene. That's brilliant. Oh, that looks great. And I think you've got a customer from me, so I'll have to dive into that. And I think awesome. you and Joe are great. So let's talk about these events. Now, this first came to my attention with the train, which I think was Chicago to New Orleans at the time.
That's correct. Yep.
So whose brainchild were these, and what is the sort of purpose of them?
That's 100% Jay Thorn.
Right.
So Jay hates flying. He travels everywhere he can by Amtrak train, and several times had taken the Amtrak from Chicago to San Francisco, and he'd even gone to Seattle. Like, Chicago to San Francisco, one way on a train is 52 hours.
Wow.
And he took it there and back. And on one of the trips, he wrote basically an entire novel. And so he was joking one day on Twitter, and saying that he wanted to go like talking about doing that. And Lindsay Broker chimed in and she was like, I would love to do that. So he immediately DMs Lindsay and was like, let's do it. Cause that's how Jay is. Jay's like, he'll ask because the worst thing is going to happen is someone's going to say no. And Lindsay was like, yeah, I'd really be open to that. And Jay was like, okay, well, I'm going to go ask Joanna Penn and see if she'd be interested in that. So he goes to Joanna, and Joanna's like, yeah, that'd be really cool. And then he's like, well, I have one more person I want to go. I'm asking my buddy Zach, who I write with. And he came to me and I was like, yeah, of course I'll go. Like, yeah, I'll go. Of course. So we ended up, the 4 of us ended up meeting in Chicago, and we took a train to New Orleans. On the train, we talked about what we wanted to do. The whole, well, I'll get to that in a second, and then we spent a week together in New Orleans, writing this story that we came up with, and we finished an entire first draft in a week.
Wow.
The 4 of us. And, but also got to hang out, spend time together, go see the city together, all this stuff. And so that was like the first thing we did. So we're one of my favorite bands was actually playing in New Orleans that week, and they're from Sweden. So I was like, oh my gosh, I gotta
can't be an ABBA.
Works out. Yeah, I was like, this totally works out. So so me and Jay went to that concert. We're sitting down eating at a restaurant before, and he goes, man, he's like, this has been awesome this week. We should I think we could turn this into like a business. And we started brainstorming ideas. And before you knew it, it was actually, I guess it would have been the next year. No, it was that year. Later that year, we did the first Authors on a Train, where we actually had people come with us, and we took, I think the first one was 8 authors. And we had people come from all over the world. I mean, we had 2 people from the UK. We had someone from Australia. It was crazy. And we did that same thing. We took Chicago and New Orleans, spent a week together, and out of that trip came an anthology, and that we published. And so we've done the train thing a couple different times. We did New Orleans. We did that one more time last year, right before the pandemic took off. We did Authors on a Train, California, and we went from LA to San Francisco. That was really cool because we rented one big house that everyone stayed in. So there were 17 authors staying in one house. It could have been a reality TV show. Like it was crazy. But so we do the train thing. We also do what we call world building weekends, where we do these one-off like themed events. So for instance, we've done Sci-Fi Seattle, where we built a sci-fi world inside the Mopop Museum in Seattle, right under the Space Needle. That was a 2-day thing, sitting around, everyone throwing ideas around, and then published the anthology. We did Rock-a-Pock, where we rented the VIP room at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland.
Wow.
And then built out an apocalyptic world. And published anthology. And then this year, in July, we're doing Witches of Salem, and we're going to Salem, Massachusetts, and doing like a paranormal thing. And then we're doing Vampires of New Orleans around Halloween.
Tell me how these work, Zach. So if an author turns up on these weekends, I think I would be nervous that I'm not good enough to write on with these other people or experienced enough to write in these different styles. Well, what's the expectation of the participant?
So it's funny. One thing we've learned is that people come for a lot of different reasons. So we have people who come, to do the whole process. So like the way it works is we spend 2 days in a room, and the first part is we do some lectures. So like we teach 3-story method because, and we talk about some other stuff, like some self-pub stuff, like marketing and some things like that. And we have Q&As because you get people from all different levels and stuff who come to these events, but which is good because anyone can do it. But we use 3-story method as a basis for your short story. So if you're going to submit a short story, like we have a sheet you have to go by because we want everything to be consistent. And we also challenge people like to keep all their stories to 5 scenes, and stuff. Cause it's a challenge for people, and also when we edit the stories, it makes it a lot easier. But so we do some teaching, but the majority of the weekend is everyone sitting around a table. And, we come with an idea. So, for instance, in July, we're going to be doing, I'll use one we already did. So when we did Rock-a-Pock, we knew we were going to be doing an apocalyptic world. So, we sat there, okay, well, how did the world end? When did it end? We end up deciding on like a solar flare. And then just kind of built out from that. And so some people go through the whole process and they end up submitting a story. It gets published. Some people don't even write the story. They just come and they do for either to learn with us or to just be able to hang around with other authors. But the coolest part of the weekend, and I think what people like the most, is the collaborative of us being around a table, all building this world out and learning everyone's process and like being involved in that. There's a certain energy that you can't replicate. Like that's a big reason. Like we didn't even discuss possibly doing this virtually once the pandemic hit. We were like, no, we're not going to do that because we know the value of being in person. Yeah. And there's just a magic of being in that room, and it's hard to explain, but it makes these events super, super, super fun to do. So did that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, it does. It sounds amazing actually. And I completely agree. Being in the same room, it's pretty rare still for authors to work together. I think even at conferences, you don't really sit down and write together. I mean, some people do organize themselves into groups and go off and do that. And I'd love to try that. But there must be a particular energy about being with other authors writing at the same time.
And we don't do, some people do start their stories there, but we tell people they don't have to actually write until they get home. Okay. So like by the end of the weekend, what we try to make sure everyone has is a pitch so they can get up in front of the room and pitch their story idea. And to make everyone comfortable, Jay and I always go first. Actually, that's one of the really fun things we do is that that people love, so they can kind of see our processes. Jay and I don't talk about our ideas and what we want to come with until we're ready to pitch it to the room. So we actually do a live brainstorming session in front of everybody, and they get to see our pitch, how we collaborate. They get to see that happen in person live with it's 100% raw. And we might not, neither of us might not even have an idea. And then we have to sit there and figure it out. But they get to see how that develops, how we ask questions to each other, how we build on those ideas. And then they, even during the process, like when I'm done my first draft, I send that out to all the attendees so they can see this is what the first draft looks like. Then they'll get to see like, these are the comments I leave Jay, so they can kind of see like every part of the process of how he and I collaborate. And so that's really fun too. But by the end of the weekend, everyone has a pitch that they can pitch to the room. And then that's really fun too, because then it's like, you have people going, what if you did this? What have you thought about this? And everyone's stories get even better. Like even ours, like we sit there and we tell people, if you have an idea, stop us. Like we want to hear it. And we've written stories that we wouldn't have if we didn't have everybody in there in the room with us doing that. It's amazing.
Yeah. So that's slightly different from the first train where you did write. You went off into your little cabin. You sort of met a couple of times a day, didn't you? And go off into your little cabins and wrote your chapters.
We did. Yeah. That was always funny because of the time differences, like, you know, because Joanna was coming from England. So she had this, you know, she was waking up at like 3 a.m. or whatever. Yeah. And then Lindsay was coming from Seattle, which is 2 hours behind New Orleans. So she was like, it was everyone's schedules were funny, but yeah, like we would have a meeting in the morning at a time that worked for everybody, kind of talk about where we were. And then everyone was just responsible for getting their words done. You know, we would normally, everyone would go off to their own coffee shop or whatever. Sometimes Jay and I would go sit and work together, but everyone kind of did their own thing. And then we'd like meet up later to go places and go to dinner and stuff like that. So,
yeah, very cool
fun stuff.
So obviously we've had the pandemic, which has put the brakes on this. What are your plans for the next 12 months?
Yeah. So Jay and I, you know, made the decision a few weeks ago that we're going forth with our events this year. So I mentioned Witches of Salem we're doing in July, which that one's sold out. We're also doing Vampires of New Orleans, which we had to delay from last year.
Right.
But that's going through. And then also we're doing the other thing we do that I haven't mentioned is we do the Career Author Summit, which is a conference. And that we're moving forward with that too. So that's going to be taking place. I think it's September 18th and 19th. It's September for sure. And that's going to be here in Nashville. And there'll be about 125 people in the room. So we're moving forward with that. And yeah, there are tickets available for that one. So, and we have really good speakers and everything. So if people are interested in that, they can go to thecareerauthor.com and there's an events tab. They can click on that and it'll have all the speakers and everything. And yeah, so, and we might have some more announcements coming for that really soon. So
cool.
Yeah.
That sounds great. Is that just ahead of NINC or does it clash with NINC or I'm trying to think?
I'm honestly not sure.
Yeah,
I don't think they're at the same time.
No. No, I think it might be just before. Okay, and a couple of days in Nashville can't be bad.
No.
That sounds great. And your genres you've done, I mean, I was trying to think about Lindsay. You know, Lindsay's fantasy, sci-fi.
Yeah.
So when she came in, what was the genre of the book you wrote on the train? And how do you sort of decide the genres you're going to work with?
Yeah, so that's one thing, you know, as far as the moving forward, I know you asked for the next 12 months, like we do have some plans for some other events that we're planning on announcing our 2022 schedule at the Career Author Summit.
Okay.
So, and we are planning on, because I know a lot of our stuff like is very sci-fi oriented or fantasy. We are going to branch out a little bit. You know, the thing to remember too, though, is like with this vampire thing we're doing in July. I mean, there's a lot of different types of vampire stories you can write. I mean, there's romance, there's horror, like, you know, and you don't even have to write that stuff to want to do it. But one other thing I want to mention about those two, because it's kind of cool, and I'll come back to your question about Lindsay because that's a good question. When we do those anthologies, we give all the proceeds to a local charity.
Wow.
So we pick out a local charity from whatever city we're in, and all the money we make goes to the charity. So, but yeah, so when we did the book with Lindsay and Joanna, the question you brought up was a really good one, because we had to think about that, because we had to really think about time. And obviously we write, like, Joanna writes thrillers, and that's like kind of close. Like, that's much closer to what Jay and I do than what Lindsay does with I wouldn't say much closer, but it probably is a little closer. So we ended up anchoring it in Jay's American Demon Hunters world. So he has a series called American Demon Hunters, which actually, he got a bunch of authors to like collaborate on individual books that are standalones. So we just made this a standalone in that world. And it definitely has elements of fantasy, thriller. Like, it definitely was off from what Lindsay normally writes, but it has like demons in it and stuff. So, but the entire story takes place on the train. And it was fun because we used like different experiences we had on the train. Like, I remember me, Lindsay, and Joanna walking around being like, oh man, there was like an axe or something in case there's like a fire. We're like, oh, we got to have that in the story, and stuff like that. And then there's like, we had this awesome train attendant, this awesome Jamaican guy, and we ended up like giving him this really epic death in the story, and stuff like that.
I hope he appreciated it. How he was killed.
Jay and I actually saw him on one of the future train trips.
Oh, wow.
We were like, dude, we killed you. He remembered us, and we ended up sending him a book and stuff.
Excellent.
But yeah, what you said is definitely a challenge. But with that particular project, we just anchored it in a pre-existing thing, because all the rules and stuff were already established. So it saved us a ton of time on all that type of stuff.
And do you think this would ever widen out to romance and thriller, more sort of contemporary thrillers without fantastical elements?
Yes, we have some plans for that. Where we're just kind of
because it's a format, right, that would work regardless of genre. It would work with nonfiction.
It does. The tricky part is that we try to go to a city that has some kind of really strong thematic element that's related to that.
Right.
So, like we did science fiction in Seattle. We did we're doing vampires in New Orleans. We're going to Salem. All these different places like that. So that's kind of the trick, is to try to find a city that's really synonymous with something. But we have ideas.
We'd have to go to Langley. For Langley for thrillers.
We have some ideas for thrillers.
Yeah.
So, and we also we would love to come across the pond. Like we would really like to do that. And we have some ideas for that too, but there's obviously some logistics and stuff we have to figure out with that.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that'd be very cool. You have to let us know about that.
For sure.
Great. Well, it sounds really good. And what I like about, I loved when I spoke to Jay, and I can feel it with you. There's an energy from you guys who want to do things and get things done. And I end up doing lots of things. I sometimes feel I'm a bit passive, but you're not. You're the opposite of that. You're let's do this.
Early on that first train trip, and I tell her this all the time, and I send her emails every year, and my full-time anniversary is coming up on April 21st. That'll be 4 years I've been full-time. So, and Joanna's the reason, because Joanna, I've told the story in another podcast, but like the dinner on the last night after a couple of drinks, she said it more colorfully, but she basically looked at me and said I was scared to quit my job. Mm-hmm. And then I went home and quit my job.
Wow.
because of Joanna.
That's a lot of responsibility on Penn's shoulders there.
So she checks in with me and Jay quite a bit. And, one thing she's always reminded us of is like, don't depend on just having book royalties. Like there are very few people that can get by on doing that. So, Jay and I have found, and Jay's doing a lot more stuff now. I mean, we're not doing as much stuff together as we were. I mean, the pandemic changed a lot of stuff for us. But we've really found a niche with these events and stuff, and found something we really love doing. And it's a way to make a little bit of money, but also see places, meet really cool people. I love it. It's awesome. And it's another revenue stream, so it's awesome. So
superb. Well, Zach, it's been delightful talking to you. Thank you so much indeed for coming on. I can't wait to to be somewhere in a room with you and chat through this, and maybe be on one of your events one day when I can clear some time from my schedule.
What to make it happen for sure. So
yeah, no, that would be great.
Awesome.
Superb. Thank you so much indeed. We'll catch up again at some point in the future, and wish you well with your plans to emerge from the forced hibernation of the pandemic and get back out into the room with some authors.
I got my 2 vaccinations, so I'm good. I'm feeling good about it. So.
Good for you. Excellent. You're ahead of me. I've just got the 1 so far. Number 2's coming.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
There you go. Zach Bohannon. Yes, he's a lovely guy, and I hope we bump into Zach soon. So I'm reading Save the Cat Writes a Novel and the 3-Story Method at the same time. I've had to deliberately buy them in paperback because when I'm up in my bedroom, I just read on my Kindle non-fiction and, not writing non-fiction, but aeroplane non-fiction. And so I keep these downstairs so I can read them in the office and downstairs. And this is, I think, a very clear and concise description of story writing, of novel writing, and a good method. I'm about a third of the way through that. So I've only got to 1 of the 3 stories so far. Save the Cat is based on, obviously, the screenwriting stuff. I can't remember the guy's name who originally did it, but it's a novel version of that. Which I'm just getting into, but there's a bit of background to go through with that as well. But the idea is that every story basically has these 13 beats, and it became a bit of a Bible in Hollywood. I think the studio producers looked for these 13 beats in their scripts, became the way of doing it, and it's not a bad way of looking at it. And then there will also be people listening to this going, but I'm not going to be a formula writer. I'm going to do my own unique thing. And it kind of deals with that as well at the beginning of what people really mean by that and what it actually means. But yeah, I don't suppose you read many of these How to Write Novel books anymore, Mark, do you?
No, I haven't read. When I started writing 15 years ago, I bought loads, but I haven't read anything for ages.
No. And you don't want to teach it either, do you? I've noticed this about you. You're not one to teach
not
craft.
Really. No, not really. It's not. I don't think it's. I'm not sure I'd be the best teacher for that kind of thing. So no, I have my way of doing things. It works quite well. There are other ways, obviously, lots of different ways to skin the cat once you've saved it.
It's pointless saving it.
Yeah, no, not that's. Other people can do that better than me.
Good. Okay. Well, what you do well, of course, is the marketing side of things and paid ads, which is really what SPF is all about. Now, I was going to talk about what to do when Amazon knocks on your door and offers you a spot in Prime, or knocks on your door and offers you a daily deal and so on, what the pros and cons are of that. I think I'm going to save that for the next episode and do a little bit more research and pick people's brains on it, because it's something that's happening to me now, not with my book, but with the Fuse books. And I'm having to balance things on things like if you're going to apply for BookBub, where you do want control over your pricing, it sort of blocks that out for a period of time. On the other hand, gives visibility to number 1 in your series, which is the whole purpose of going for BookBub anyway. So I think I'll say yes to the Prime deals, that's for sure, for now. But we'll have a better chat, I think, about that next time, Mark.
Yep, yeah. I mean, I had, I think, 3 emails come in yesterday, various books in various jurisdictions to go into Prime. So I always say yes, but we can talk about that later.
Yeah. Good. Okay, well, it's Friday, it's Hello Books Day, lots of stuff to do today, and you've got a dog to... No, you're not walking the dog. Someone else is walking the dog today.
No, he's being walked, yeah.
Being walked. It's a treat day for the dog.
It is, yeah, better than going out with me.
And what's your mental health thing you're doing today? Because dog walking, I know, is part of the way you keep saying.
Yes, I might go for a swim, because our pool is open now, or I might go and play golf. I'm not sure yet.
Okay, good. Well, I'm, look out for you.
Oh, thank you very much.
We all do. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much indeed to Zach for being our interviewee today. Great guest he was indeed. All that remains for me to say is it's a goodbye from him.
And a goodbye from me.
Goodbye.
Get show notes, the podcast archive, and free resources to boost your writing career at selfpublishingshow.com. Join our thriving Facebook group at selfpublishingshow.com/Facebook. Support the show at patreon.com/selfpublishingshow. And join us next week for more help and inspiration so that you can make your mark as a successful indie author. Publishing is changing, So get your words into the world and join the revolution with the Self-Publishing Show.